Do we have to jettison some essential part of our humanity if we aspire to be a leader? Do we have to get tough? Do we have to separate ourselves from the masses? Do we have to lose empathy and curiosity and just drive forward in this quest to create something new? Or is our humanity the essential key to good leadership? Today's guest, Jennifer Nash, answers that question with her book, Be Human, Lead Human. I hope you enjoy the conversation. So without further ado, Jennifer Nash, welcome to the Plant Yourself podcast.
Oh, thank you so much, Howie. I'm so excited to be here today.
We're going to get into it. Before we talk about your wonderful book, I would love for you to introduce yourself to the audience and let them know kind of a little bit about you and what you're up to.
So my name is Jennifer Nash. I am an executive coach based in Austin, Texas. I recently wrote the book called Be Human, Lead Human: How to Connect People and Performance. And when I am not coaching or consulting or doing work with organizations around the world, I am a competitive ballroom dancer.
Really?
Yeah.
So the first thing that comes to my mind is like stepping on other people's feet. I guess that's not what you mean, right?
Well, I have done some of that in the past, I will admit, especially when we're not coordinated exactly right. But yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned that because my husband actually decided that he would take up ballroom dancing because he had 2 left feet. And that's actually,
Okay.
so we met at a ballroom dance class.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Cool. And you do mention that, and I didn't realize this about you. So it went over my head in the book that dancing and leadership are not different in some ways.
No, there are actually so many similarities. And I actually teach leadership through ballroom dance. So it's an interesting way to bring the concept of working together and partnering to someone that maybe they haven't thought about it in that way before.
Ooh, can we start there? So look, we should mention the book, Be Human, Lead Human. You already said it. So I found myself like wanting to write down the order of the words so I didn't get it wrong, like lead human, be human. And tell me why the order that you put it in the title makes sense.
Oh, I love that question. So Be Human, Lead Human came about because as leaders, we often think we have to have all the answers, right? We have to be perfect. We have to show up and solve all of the problems and be the hero of the day. And when in reality, we're all just human beings that have, our own idiosyncrasies, our own, interests, our own unique capabilities. And when we show up in a way that makes others around us feel like they have to be perfect, that eliminates the ability of us to say, okay, well, what happens if I do make a mistake? And how is that mistake going to be viewed? And what am I going to do about it to learn from that? So being human, first of all, allows us to be our whole human selves with flaws and all, because we all have those. And if leaders allow themselves to show up as human and show where they're maybe not perfect or that they don't have all the answers or that they're not the hero that saves the day, then it allows everyone else around them to be human as well. So that's why we titled the book Be Human First and Then Lead Human After.
So one of the impeti for writing the book was Alan Mulally. So can you talk a little bit about your interaction with Alan, and then maybe we can go into a little bit of how he exemplifies a lot of what you write about?
Sure, yeah. So can I tell you a story? Do we have time?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay. All right. So think back to 2009, right? The economy is it's pretty rough time. People are worried about losing their jobs. And Alan, had just come in. So for listeners who don't know who Alan is, Alan Mulally is the former CEO of Ford Motor Company. And the company was in chaos. It was in danger of failing. And Alan was brought in to save the company. So in 2009, things were very dire. And the company had just taken out a massive home improvement loan, as Alan called it, to save the company. So he mortgaged everything, including the blue oval on the side of the building. And when I heard that message in World Headquarters, I thought, oh my gosh, this is so serious. Like this is really, this could really be the downfall of the company if this doesn't work.
So you're working there at the time?
Yes. So I was working at Ford Motor Company at the time. And, I was
Mhm.
a people leader, far down the ladder. I didn't know Alan, he didn't know me. And my department, the leadership in my department had decided that because morale, was a little bit low and people were a little struggling, that they wanted to have an appreciation event. So they bought some of these paper plates and they scattered them on tables in the building I was working in and invited everyone to come down and fill out a plate and tell somebody what you appreciated about them and then give the plate to someone. And so I had just been to world headquarters and I heard this message about, oh my gosh, like we just mortgaged the entire company basically. And I thought, well, Alan is, he's it's pretty lonely up at the top there and he's making some pretty tough decisions. And so maybe I think I'm going to write my plate of appreciation to him. So Ford at the time had just celebrated its 100th anniversary of it being in existence. And so I wrote on the plate, dear Alan, thank you for being the change that we needed to see to survive the next 100 years. And I decorated the plate with some Superman stickers because that's what they had given us. And, put it in an interoffice envelope, sealed it up, made that little figure eight with the twine, put a confidential sticker on it, and dropped it in interoffice mail. And I didn't think anything of it again. And so a couple weeks later, I get this message on my phone and it's Alan and he's telling me, how much he appreciated my plate. Now, he wasn't able to get the plate via interoffice mail because a couple weeks before that, the leadership had called of the group I was in had called me down to their office. And when I got to the office, in the middle of the room, there was this round table. And in the center of the round table, there was this rectangular interoffice envelope. And it had been opened because the twine was, undone and the sticker was unsealed. And Howie, I looked at that plate and I was so disappointed because I knew exactly what was in the plate and I knew when it happened. And the leaders in the room told me, look, we can't get this to him. And I said, well, I don't understand why. Did we, are things so bad that we had to let, interoffice mail personnel go? Like what's going on? And they're like, no, we don't think it's appropriate to give this to him. And I just, I'm not really one to follow the rules and I don't have a lot of patience for things that don't seem to make a lot of sense. I said, okay. And I took the plate back and I had a decision to make in that moment. I had a decision to make where I was either going to say, okay, and go back to my desk and just keep my head down and keep working. I was going to take matters into my own hands and get the plate to Alan. I decided that I was going to get the plate to Alan. So I literally walked out of that office. I walked straight out to my car, jumped in my car and drove over to world headquarters, went up to the 12th floor and Alan wasn't there. So I gave the plate to his assistant and asked her if she would please get this to him when he was back in. And she said, sure, no problem. And then I went back to my office. Well, then after that, a couple weeks later was when I got that phone message. So you can imagine how surprised I was to get that message where he's telling me this,
Mm.
you know, this means so much to me. Thank you so much for giving me this plate. I so appreciate you. And I saved that message because it meant so much to me. I couldn't believe with everything he had going on his plate, pun intended, that, he took the time to reach out to me, somebody far down the ladder that he didn't even know. And a couple weeks after that, I get this big package in the mail and it's in her office envelope. And I love surprises. I'm like, oh, what's this? And it's from the office of the president. And so I open it and it is a handwritten letter from Alan where he said, dear Jennifer, and he put a heart around my name and then said, thank you for everything that you're doing for our Ford. And then there was a whole bunch of Ford swag in it, which was super cool. And I couldn't believe it. I mean, I looked at that letter and it was the first time in 16 years of working that I felt seen and heard as a human being. And not just for the output I
Mm.
could deliver for the company, but as a person who had hopes and dreams and someone who, had aspirations outside of the company. It was a pivotal moment for me in my career. And it really launched me on this quest to figure out, why do we not have more leaders like Alan? What is getting in our way of having leaders who see the whole human person in front of them and recognize that and acknowledge that? A lot of people will say, well, that's all well and good and it's sort of kumbaya and, let's all, join hands and sing, around the campfire. But when you look at the results that Alan got, he was in the middle of a turnaround. He was transforming the company. And when you look at the results that he got after 7 years of being in office, he increased the stock price 1,837%. His employee engagement rate went from 40% to over 90%. That's over a 50% improvement. I mean, who does that? So people can say, oh yeah, well, that's all soft and it's all, but that's not for me. Well, I would invite them to think about, these are some hard results that turned out that happened from that type of leadership. So when I say it was a catalyst for me to start my study of leadership and continue my MBA and then go on and get my PhD, I took all of the research that I did during my PhD and put it into this book. So Alan is how this book came to be. And it really changed my life, and it changed my career, and it changed my leadership.
What a great story. And, the thing that came to me as you're telling it is exactly what you said, like, what are the obstacles, because like no disrespect to Alan, but like what you're describing isn't genius level behavior. It's not like he could do something that nobody else in the world could do. He like, you'd expect that from like a librarian or a kindergarten teacher or, the neighbor down the street to just sort of, right? So there must be significant obstacles. Either it's some sort of selection bias, the type of people who are promoted higher and higher into leadership, or a function of that rare air that makes them somehow more stressed or less empathetic and less aware of others and themselves. What's the TLDR? What's the spoiler as to why Alan's behavior was so out of the ordinary?
So I think there are a few reasons why his behavior. So for Alan, it's not out of the ordinary behavior, but for most leaders, it is out of the ordinary behavior. And I think there's a couple of reasons why. I think one of them is that we have engineered the humanity out of the workplace. So we are taught when we go into the workplace that, emotions have no place in the workplace. We are taught that leaders have to have all the answers. We are taught that to get ahead, you have to figure out whose coattails to jump on. So when I look at this and I actually, do an 8D on it, if we're in the engineering world, right? There's a lot of things that have to be unlearned in order to lead in the way that Alan was leading.
What's 8D?
So 8D is an engineering process where they basically dive down into the root cause analysis and figure out what went wrong and how to fix it and how to happening again. Yeah.
Cool. I'm going to start using that. People are going to be impressed.
Yeah.
As soon as I find out what the 8Ds are. Sorry, I interrupted. So I mean, was there more that you were going to say?
Yeah.
Before?
No. So I was just closing that comment out by stating that it's a question of not so much what do we have to do differently, but what do we have to unlearn in order to be in that way. And so, one of the things that Alan said, in his principles and practices is that people come first, right? Love them up. It's one of those principles that he has. But what do we do in organizations? We typically put the human element to the back burner, and we focus on profit, and we focus on performance, and we focus on external stakeholders rather than focusing internally on the people that we have in the organization who are going to make our strategy and our products and our services come to life. So unlearning, I think, is the key to how do we get to the type of leadership that Alan demonstrates and what he was able to achieve at Ford Motor Company. And I will agree, it's not rocket science. It is simple, but it is not easy. And when you are looking at changing the culture of an organization from where Ford was at the time to somewhere, very siloed, people held on to knowledge, there wasn't a lot of working together, and bringing someone in from the airplane industry, right? So that's another piece of this too, because is very much, it's a car-driven city, right? So bringing someone in who was an airplane guy into a car company, there were a lot of people who didn't think that he could pull that off. And one of the things that I think a lot of people don't know is that when Ellen got to Dearborn in, June of 2026, which was 3 months before he actually started in the job, he did a listening tour. He went around to all the plants, all the corporate offices, and he asked people what was working well and what wasn't working well and what would they change if they were CEO. He wanted to understand where the company was before he came in and tried to start affecting change. And I think by doing that, he started to signal that, hey, here's this person who has a very different leadership style than people who came before him. And maybe this is somebody that's going to do things a little differently. Oh, I think we're going to pay attention to this and see what happens. He was showing up in a different way. So, unlearning, I think, here is the key.
Yeah, and I'm imagining that there's going to be some resistance and distrust of someone who comes in a different way. Like the paper plate exercise, I could so imagine an external consultant coming in and saying, oh, here's an activity you can do to improve morale. And it would totally backfire, right? Because people know like it's sort of coercive, it's sort of performative. And so this listening tour, I suddenly remembered this movie I saw when I was a teenager. It was a Robert Redford film called Brubaker about, do you know it?
No, I don't know the movie.
Oh, so he's brought in at the beginning of the movie as a prisoner to this very rough maximum security facility, and he gets into fights and he like fighting with the guards. And after about 10 or 11 minutes, there's an announcement he's brought in and he's the new warden.
Oh,
right. And that's like, so instant credibility. Like I wanted to experience it from the other side, almost died. Right. And so that like, Alan's listening tour was like not at that level of drama and risk, but still on an emotional level to be able to talk, like people knew who this guy was, and for them to speak freely and for him to come in and say, I don't know shit about cars, right? Which is like one of the things that I admired about his approach was, I don't know, why are you asking me? I'm the last person who should ask.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he had this way of, he had these, weekly meetings that he would have, with his direct reports. And one of the signals that he was sending was that, this is a different culture. We're going to do things differently. And the way we're going to show part of that is that when you have this weekly meeting, you get to invite a guest. And so in these weekly meetings, there were people in the room who maybe weren't part of that organization, weren't part of that, different, that operating unit. Maybe they were from the outside. And so you had people in there who were watching and observing and seeing how things were happening. And, Alan was very much like that, right? He was not going to be the one to stand up and say, oh, this is how we should fix this and this and this. His approach was more, oh, well, Bernie is having that problem, who might be able to help Bernie with that problem, right? So he's inviting the group of people to start to think about how can they support each other and how can they help each other solve these problems. He tells the story of the liftgate issue out in Oakville, where, there was a problem with the liftgate issue and the line had actually stopped running. Now, as you know, in the car business, if the line stops running, that's millions of dollars, per second that are being lost. It's a big deal. So you want to get that line back up and running as quickly as possible. And so, immediately in the room when he said that, there were 4 people that said, oh, well, my engineers have looked at a problem like that before. I'm going to make sure we get them out to Oakville and help you out. Another one said, oh, I know that we can solve this and this and this. So, I'm going to get you those results of what we did before, and that'll help you fix this problem. So people were actually coming to support each other in a culture of working together, which was not the culture that was there before Alan got there. So yes, there were people that weren't willing to do that. And Alan was of the opinion that, oh, well, this is how we're operating now. And these are the principles and practices that we have. And everyone is expected to, agree to these. But if this doesn't work for you, that's okay. We think that you're going to be happier elsewhere. And so there was an invitation to the person that, essentially they weren't being told that they had to leave, but they were being advised in a very kind way that they had a choice to make, and they could choose to stay and they could operate in the new culture with the new behaviors that were expected, or they could leave and find somewhere that would be more comfortable for them.
Yeah. And I think this speaks sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say very few people left, actually.
And I think, this speaks to, I think, one of the concerns or criticisms, like you mentioned kumbaya, that showing up this way makes you a doormat. One of the things, I think the phrase that I remember was sort of that Alan had zero tolerance for deviation,
Yes.
right, from the practices and principles.
Yeah.
So that's not someone who gets walked on.
No, absolutely not. I think that sometimes people interpret the kindness or, the smiling or the affableness of Alan as potentially a weakness and that he's not a strong leader. That could not be farther from the truth. There was one of the principles and practices was we don't make jokes about other people because jokes aren't funny and it destroys trust between people. It destroys the culture. And, he has a whole list of these things, that were put up on the wall. We actually had on our badges, we had one Ford, which was our motto at the time, right? And on the back, the Ford was spelled out and it had the behaviors, from these principles and practices that we were expected to demonstrate. And we had that on our badge and we wore that all the time, right? Because you had to badge in and badge out and, get into the buildings and things. And it was always on one of those like I don't know what you call it, like a lanyard that like, stretches out.
Like the
Yes,
retractable.
exactly, like that little retractable circle thing. Yeah, so they were always everyone
Uh-huh.
had those. So you had it all the time, and all you had to do was look at it if you couldn't remember what it was. And people were consistently referring back to this, because it became an artifact of the new culture. So not only was it something that was talked about, it was written down and it was visible and it was tangible. And that was also one of the ways that Alan was able to effect this transformation in a massive company that had been operating in such a different way for so many decades before.
Yeah, lucky for him, it wasn't Mitsubishi or way too many.
Yeah.
So I want to come back to you. So you are working at Ford. You discover
Mhm.
this way of being a leader and how rare it is. You go back to get your PhD, and now you're out in the world. Are you still working at Ford in that capacity, or are you hung up your own shingle as a coach and consultant, and you're like looking at normal people trying to turn them into Alan? Is that kind of like how you went out into the world?
Not exactly. So I had a little stint in there where I got recruited away from Ford to go work at Deloitte Consulting. So I was at Deloitte
I
for
see.
10 years, helping organizations transform and become more effective, in their performance. And so I had a lot of exposure and experience to seeing a lot of different companies, and how they were doing things and how things could maybe be improved to get them to where they wanted to be. And then after that 10 years, I decided that, I wanted to be a little bit more outside of the corporate box. And so I started my own company in 2018. And I've been fortunate enough to be doing this kind of work and working with amazing companies since then.
Gotcha. So with the work at Deloitte, I'm imagining that people hire Deloitte very much for strategy,
Mhm.
right? For sort of nuts and bolts stuff, and a little bit less for the touchy-feely, right? The human. Like I don't know that people go, yeah, we need to be more human. Let's bring in Deloitte, right? Like that's not how. So you had to work on projects that involved sort of, strategic considerations, implementations, objectives, timelines, Gantt charts, all that.
Mhm.
How did you infuse human
Mhm.
into that work? And, did it take a while? And did you get more and more confident as you saw it adding value?
Mhm.
Like, because I wonder about this for myself,
Yeah.
because there's this little voice in my head saying, helping people be nicer to each other, which is, like the shorthand for how I think about my work, isn't hard. Like somebody who's like, let's put together the plan for this and the strategy for that and the execution document for the third thing.
Mhm.
So like I'm asking this almost from a place of a little bit of self-doubt. Like, is this really that important? Like, how did you
Yeah.
navigate that?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a fantastic question. And I think it's one that more organizations should be asking. So, my work at Deloitte was in the human capital practice. So, Deloitte at the time was structured into three areas. We had strategy and ops, we had human capital, and we had technology. So, my area was in the human capital space, but I spanned strategy to execution on technology projects, on strategy projects, on culture projects, on finance transformation projects. So I was always working on something that involved some type of strategy, but it had a people component to it, obviously, right? Because that's what we have in our organizations. We have people. So we know from a transformation and change standpoint that the most often reason why transformation and change fails is because there is no people component. We may have the greatest strategy in the world and we may have the best roadmap and the best execution plan, but if we haven't prepared the people to go on that journey of change, it will fail. And that's what we see most often in organizations. So my work was around helping organizations figure out what the strategy is and then aligning their people strategy with that transformation strategy to help them be successful at the change that they were trying to implement.
Gotcha. So people strategy is still strategy, and then you've got people, right? So what were your experiences when you're like, like this stuff seems so obvious, right? To you and to me and the people we hang out with, like, be nice, listen to people, understand them, make sure they matter. And yet you're going into a world in which you've said, we've unlearned all those things, or we've learned competing behaviors.
Mhm.
So what was it like to kind of go in and come in with your angel wings that you want to hand out and finding that people didn't have the capacity or the interest or the self-confidence to start wearing it?
Mhm. I think the very first step that it takes is awareness. So if you don't know what you don't know, there's no way that you can do anything different.
Mm-hmm.
So first and foremost, when you're coming into an organization and they're asking to change and they have all these plans and they have these deadlines and they have this and that, and then you ask them, well, what have you told your people about the change? A lot of times there were question marks. Like they would look at you like a deer in the headlights and go, what? Well, we're just changing. So how do you expect someone to buy into a change, for lack of a better term, if they don't even know what's going on? So often, the strategy around the transformation was a technical strategy. There was lacking this focus on why are we changing? What is changing? How does it impact the person that is going to have to deal with doing their job differently after this change? How do we sustain this change in a way that makes it um, self-sustaining, right? How do we get employees to be motivated about this change? What's in it for them? So really looking at it from that human element is extremely critical. And it's not just being nice and being kind and being understanding and, making them feel like they matter. It's more around there's a very structured approach to bringing people in, engaging them in hearts and minds, and then getting them to behave in a different way. Because what you're really talking about with change and transformation is you're talking about changing people's behavior. And in order to change behavior, you need to change mindset and thinking. And in order to change thinking, you have to change awareness.
Mm.
So you have to unlearn a whole lot before you gain awareness. That was my
So I'm thinking about this. Yeah, thank you. I'm thinking about that from sort of a neurological
Mhm.
perspective that, if I have to change,
Mhm.
and I think the key words in that phrase is have to, right?
Well,
Like I've just gotten back a medical report
mhm.
or, my person close to me informed me that, this isn't okay, right? And so once I identify like that I need to change,
Mhm.
I focus on the gap and it puts me into a kind of a fight or flight.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if that feels that way sort of organizationally, like, why are we doing this change?
Yes.
And it almost like, why isn't it done yesterday already? And that can sort of like defeat, you write in the book about sort of, the where the blood flows in your brain. Is it is it an emotional hijack or is it in the thinking part?
Right. 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 If I think back to, an example of this, when I was at Ford, we had Mark Fields come on and do a webinar town hall, right, that everyone was watching from their desks. And the very first thing Mark said was, if we don't change, we will die. And I still remember that, 15, 16, 17 years later. I mean, I remember that phrase because it was such a strong statement. And I thought,
Hmm.
"Oh my gosh, what does he mean? Like, we're gonna die? What does that mean?" And so like you said, putting you into fight or flight, yes, it may have put some people into fight or flight or freeze modes. But what it also did was it said, hey, things need to be different. We have an opportunity to make things different. How are we going to effect this transformation so that we can survive? And what's in it for you if we survive? Well, you get to keep your job. You get to keep a roof over your head. You get to keep a paycheck coming in, right? And for a lot of people, that's a very strong motivator. So thinking through the transformation, sometimes semantics is also part of this, right? You get this bad report from your doctor. Oh, I have to change this. I have to do that. Well, what about if you said to yourself, I get the opportunity to shift how this next chapter in my life is going to look? That is a very different mindset and a very different perspective on the behaviors and the thinking that you may need to adopt to go forward. And if you look at human behavior and motivation, even from a very early age, a 2-year-old, right, telling them they have to do something because of X, Y, and Z, like they're going to resist. They don't want to do that, right? So it's wired in us that way. But if you give them the option, well, you could have this or you could have that, which choice would you prefer, right? Then they feel like they have agency and they don't have the resistance there. So semantics, NLP, there's some pieces of that going on here as well. But I would say it also speaks to the psyche and how we perceive threats versus how we perceive opportunity.
So I'm hearing you say that Mark Shield's webinar was not ineffective in kind of getting everyone attention and shaking them. I'm assuming he didn't end the webinar, or the process didn't end on that note.
No. He actually
right.
So that way.
Like I remember when I was first studying organizational dynamics, and I was working for Peter Bregman in the last millennium.
Yeah.
One of the phrases, I can't remember what book it's from, is like, but people don't change because they see the light, they change because they feel the heat.
Yeah.
And so that, so I can see there's a place for, oh, look, a lion, maybe we should run away.
Yes, exactly.
But it turns out that organizational change strategy is not the same as defending yourself against a predator, right? It really is about discovering opportunity.
Right. Now, if you want to get people to pay attention, right, and realize, oh, there's something different here, there's something that I need to pay attention to here, then yes, maybe you start out a speech like that, right? Oh, we need to change or we will die. That definitely gets attention. And it sends the signal that something is different in this ecosystem right now. And because of how we are wired, right, from prehistoric times, like you better run faster, you're going to be the one eaten. It's coming from that. Oh, we're going to pay attention now. He gets your attention, and then he starts to move into the conversation where it's explaining and helping people feel more secure. Yeah.
So I'm curious, back to Ford. So there was a big three, right, in Detroit.
Yeah.
And so this one Ford, and we're in this together. How far did the usness extend? Was it like we are going to compete and crush, GM? I'm blanking on the other one. Right? Are we going to?
At the time it was Chrysler. Right now it's been many different things since then. So we'll just put that as
right. That's why I don't even know the name of the holding companies anymore. I was going to say Chevy, but they were always GM.
Yeah.
Right. But like, does that work to kind of create this culture of love and humanity and regard in competition with those bastards, or how did that play out?
Well, I will say that, when Alan would talk about this, he was talking about all of us internally at the company, but he was also talking about externally, all of our stakeholders, right? So people who are, our customers, people that were purchasing the vehicles to keep their families safe. He was talking about our stakeholders who, were stockholders, right? Who owned part of the company. So when he talked about this as a working together and us and being one Ford, he really meant, everyone inside and all of the stakeholders. Now, I think Alan would be, the first to say that, he was leading the company and he wanted the company to be successful. And that meant that, if we did better than the other two companies, then, that was what happened. And that was in fact exactly what happened. So, I wouldn't say that, it was at the expense of the other companies, but I would definitely say that it was an outcome of the principles and practices that he had put in place, focusing on making it better for all stakeholders, not just employees.
Gotcha. So let's talk about the book. So you're big into acronyms, which makes it easy to remember. So human is not just our species, right? It's also an acronym. So can you kind of give us the five parts of human?
Sure. So the humans framework is a framework that I have introduced in the book. Talk about how leaders can start to shift where they place their focus in leading, right? So the principles and practices of effective human leadership start with this humans framework. So there are 6 dimensions to the framework plus a supplemental dimension that holds everything together.
Oh,
So essentially
I forgot the S.
yeah. So H stands for hearing, right? So what are we actually hearing people tell us? What are they saying, right? And what are they saying not only with their verbal language, but what is their body language telling us, right? What are their facial expressions telling us? What is the tone of their voice saying, right? Like you alluded to earlier when we were talking. Oh, well, you said something about, being here in Texas and, trying it out, but it didn't really sound like that was convincing in what you wanted to do, right? So you picked up on that nonverbal language. So it's hearing is the first dimension of the framework. The second dimension of the framework is understanding. So it's one thing to speak to someone else. It's a completely other thing to make sure that they have understood what the message is that you intended to convey. And so understanding, there are multiple levels of understanding, and the book goes into some of those. So that's the U in the framework. So M stands for mattering, right? How do we make people feel that they matter? How do we help them understand that they are important? The A stands for appreciating, right? How do we show people that we appreciate them? How do we help them feel appreciated? What are the ways in which they prefer to be appreciated, right? Because people don't have the same ways that they want to be appreciated. You, Howie, may prefer a big public sign in Times Square saying, "Hey, thanks, Howie. We appreciate the job that you did," right? Another person may only want like a private, mention around the water cooler. "Hey, I really appreciate the job that you did yesterday." Um,
Hmm.
and the thing with appreciation is that it's really important to specify what you're appreciating about the person so they know what it is that was important, and why they are mattered and why they are valued. The N in the framework stands for inspiring. So this is around how do you rally people around the vision that you have? How do you get them to buy into that vision? How do you inspire them to move forward with this shared understanding? And then the S stands for seeing. So how do you help people feel seen? How do you see other people? And so those are the dimensions of the framework. Now, the framework is held together by relationships. So when you see the model in the book, you see that there are positive and negative at the top of the model, and then you have a relationship that is connecting it at the bottom, right around it. So relationships have the ability to either level up these dimensions or, make them go in the other opposite direction. That's why it's encircled by the relationships dimension. And so when we talk about relationships, we're talking about how do we interact with the others? What are the cultural dimensions of us interacting with people in the organization? What importance do we place on getting to know the people that we work with? Do we know what's important to them? Do we know what motivates them? Because you and I both know that as leaders, we can't motivate anyone to do anything. The only thing we can do is create the conditions that motivate so that people feel like they have agency and they are empowered to do the things that need to be done. So relationships are the glue that hold the humans framework together. And they're also the vehicle by which work gets done and how we deliver results. So if we don't have relationships in organizations, we don't get any work done. So that is the humans framework that I introduced in the book. There is a chapter that is dedicated to each one of those dimensions of the framework. And there is a story that is told about each of those dimensions in each chapter so that readers can see, what does this actually look like in practice? And if I were to try to do this myself, what would maybe be some of the actions and behaviors and beliefs that I need to be able to impact in that way?
Right. So before you get to those chapters, you have a self-test.
Yes.
And and I took the self-test and I was like stratospherically wonderful by my own, right? So I imagine there's kind of a self-scoring bias,
Yes.
right? That if you had 12 of my closest friends and family members do the test on my behalf, the score might be different. How do you how do you use that tool? And I know you're a stakeholder-centered trained coach, meaning that other people's feedback is sort of the lifeblood
Mhm.
of the transformational process.
Yeah.
So how do you think about, like me thinking, oh, I'm terrific on everything. I'm such a great guy.
Mhm.
And almost, certainly like highly delusional in my own self-opinion.
Well, how we know from research that people are typically, they wildly overestimate their abilities. So the way we tend to, level that out is we get perspectives from the people around them. So the Human
Uh-huh.
Leader Index that you took, it's a paper version in
Mhm.
the book, but there is also an online version. And so for people who are listening, they're welcome to go to my website. It's drjennifernash.com/.
Is that
I.
DOCDR or
It
doctor is DR?
Yeah, it's drjennifernash.com/HLI, which stands for Human Leader Index. There's also a QR code in the book that they can scan and it'll take them right to the website. And it's complimentary and they can self-assess just like you did, and then they get a report of their results. Now, for people who are interested in taking that one level further, they are able to do a 360 version of that. That is a paid option, and you can send it to 12 of your besties, and they can then help you understand, where does your measurement fall versus where does their aggregate score fall. And then where there are
Mm.
gaps or where there is dissonance will help you and start to understand where are some of the places that I may need to start looking to understand why there was a difference and what I can do to shift that behavior.
I bet the areas of the greatest gap, the greatest divergence are probably where there's the most juice for awareness. Right.
Typically, yes. Yes, there is.
Uh,
Yeah. So that is also on my website, but it is not a free option. That is something that is paid and it has a different link. So when you go
mhm.
to the HLI itself, that is just the report for an individual to take just like you did.
Gotcha.
Mhm.
Uh, look, I'm looking at these, seeing where my heart wants to go here. I guess one question, and this is in my mind because I had a 2-hour conversation with a friend who, in his 50s, discovered that he is autistic,
Oh,
and um, and we were talking about like what that discovery gave him in terms of understanding himself and not feeling guilty about, like what he said was like he was often he made to feel like he was the asshole. And I gotta say, like a lot of the behaviors, like hearing, understanding, appreciating, like he might not have engaged in those
mhm.
and in times in positions of leadership. And I'm curious, so this is, it's a beautiful framework and I want everyone around me to be doing this. And yet, is there a danger that it's going to, create a normalcy that pathologizes people who are outside of these behaviors? Like, for example, when you're listening, like looking people in the eye is a very concrete example
Mhm.
that people on this with autistic people can often not be able to take it in and still function. So I'm curious, have you come across that, or what are your thoughts?
So is the question, how do neurodivergent people use the framework effectively?
Um, that's a good question. I don't know that I arrived at one, but just that it feels like, if I were just to go in without a deep understanding and just say everyone should be like this, that it might be disrespectful, it might be pathologizing, and is it true, right? That that are, where is there room for different flavors or understandings that not everyone is going to hear and be understood and make you feel make you feel like you matter in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not even sure what the question is. Discuss.
Yeah. So I think what I'm hearing you say is there flexibility in how this framework is interpreted and how it is applied? And for people who are neurodivergent, is there a way that they can leverage this framework in a way that could help them show up in a way that they would be comfortable with? And that if others are using the framework to a person who is neurodivergent, is there a way that they can incorporate that to be more aware of what's happening and interpret it in a way that includes that? So I think what I'm hearing you
Yeah.
say is there a way that this framework can be inclusive for people who are?
Yeah. Let's pretend that I asked that very question.
Okay. Yes. And my answer would be yes. So I think there are opportunities on both sides, right? So someone is neurodivergent. Sometimes they are challenged with direct eye-to-eye contact, right? I have a niece who is in that way. So I know that about her because I know her, right? But if I came across someone who, maybe had some challenges with looking me directly in the eye, it would come to my mind that, oh, perhaps there is something with this person that is causing them discomfort with looking at me directly, right? And so in that way, I've already jumped to the understanding space of there's something else happening here that I need to be aware of and incorporate that into my behavior and my interpretation of what I am seeing in front of me, right? For the neurodivergent person, if they want to use this framework, sometimes there are some social cues that they may miss, right? We know that from neurodivergent because of how their brain works. And so pointing out some of these things can very directly can be helpful for a neurodivergent person because they're not aware that it's even happening, right? So giving them the descriptions of this, giving them an understanding of this is what it would look like or feel like or sound like if you were helping someone feel understood so that they can have a comprehension of that and be prepared going in to use that dimension of the framework. So I think there are ways to use this and make the framework inclusive for many different people that are operating with, very unique characteristics.
Great. Thank you. So now you do a 360 on someone and now you're their coach, and there are inevitably going to be some gaps. And for the people that you're brought in to coach, maybe there are some significant gaps. And I know when you talk about the scoring, even the very, very low scores are great. You're becoming self-aware. You're starting. There's no negative there. There's no shame. But when I get that score and I realize people think I'm this, but I've always thought I'm that, like I could feel like the burning behind my eyes and the heaviness in the chest, and I can feel some fear, like I've been caught out, and like now everyone's going to realize I'm actually a cockroach and not a person, like all sorts of stuff. How do you start working with someone for whom the self-awareness is kind of a shock?
Yes. So the very first thing I would do is invite them to take some time and space to digest what is in the report, right? The very first thing that's going to happen is that they will have an emotional reaction like you described, right? And they will feel some of those data points in their body, right? They may get very angry. Their temperature may go up. Their face may flush. They may feel their heart rate increase. In some ways, they feel like they're in fight or flight. And so getting that information in the first place can be very shocking for some people. And so I always recommend when they get that kind of report, and if there is that information in there that is, emotionally upsetting for them, that they take the time to process those emotions. So we know that if we don't address emotions, they metastasize. And so taking that time and space to work through that emotion in whatever way works for them. Maybe they need to go for a run. Maybe they need to go to a rage room and hit something and break things. Like maybe they just need to cry. Maybe they need to talk it out with their bestie for 3 hours on the phone. Like whatever it is that works for them to work through and process that emotion is the right choice for them. Once they've processed that, Then I invite them to schedule some time, and we will do an actual debrief of what's in the report and talk through that from a space of, now that I've worked past all the emotion, now I can look at that with more of a clear mind and really internalize, what does this mean for me, and why is it this way? Because unless we understand why it's that way, we have a hard time getting to why it's important to change it.
Mhm. So when you're talking about the why,
Mhm.
like at what level are we looking at? Like, my coaching tends to want to be therapeutic. And so I always have to sort of, recognize that my default is to talk about their mother,
Oh,
right? Metaphorically or actually, right? Like, and a lot of the work I do is around helping people see those triggered behaviors as protective.
right.
Right. So when you talking about helping people see the why, at what level are you doing it that's consistent with being a coach and not their shrink?
Right, exactly. So there is a line, and I think that that line is blurry for a lot of people, coaches included. When you are looking at something that it is getting in someone's way today, if you discover that, oh, this is rooted in historical trauma, or this is rooted in something that is essentially in the past, right? Coaching looks at someone from where they are today and takes them to where they want to go. It's future focused, it's forward facing. But if you are actually digging into someone's past and it comes up that, oh, there was some type of trauma or depression or anxiety or something that is typically a mental health type of issue, then that is something that should be focused on with their therapist. So
Mm.
finding the why, if I say, oh, well, what do you think is causing this for you today? And they start talking about, oh, when I was 3, I had this situation happen and my dad left and my mom was a drug addict. And, I'm like, well, you know what? This sounds like there's actually some historical trauma there for you that needs to be resolved. And that is when I would be referring them out to a therapist, because I'm not a licensed counselor. I'm not able to help them with that in this moment. I'm working on my license, but I don't have it yet. So that would be something that I
Mhm.
have to refer out for. Um, Now, if they have worked through that already and they understand where it came from, then they understand the why. Then we can talk about, well, what is the thinking that you have around this today, right? What is it? What is the thinking that is causing that behavior today? And how is it getting in your way? And how is it holding you back? Again, so focusing on the today and going forward. So that is how I would make the distinction, and how ICF actually also asks me to make the distinction around coaching someone, from an ethical standpoint and a moral standpoint and a legal and licensing standpoint.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Very helpful. What haven't I asked you that you would love to share?
I would say that we are at a crossroads right now. We have an opportunity to change how we lead and why we lead to help work be better for everyone. And I think AI is actually a catalyst for us to do that, right? AI is going to take away a lot of the administrative work that we have to focus on as leaders. And so that frees us
Hmm.
up to spend more time on the things that really matter, like helping people work together more effectively, making sure that we have those clear lines of communication and organization, making sure that we help people connect to their work, right? And then when we help them connect to their work, then they connect to each other, they connect to the organization, and we have higher engagement rates. So spending the time doing the things that AI can't do, right? And being our creative human selves, I think we have this opportunity right now, more than ever, to shift how we lead and why we lead, and to let go of the status quo. COVID was a huge shift, right? But we still see people wanting to go back to 2019. We still see people wanting to lead like how they did before COVID. And I think now we're at another inflection point when AI has given us this opportunity to stand up and say, how do we want to lean in as leaders? What is our identity as a leader today? How is that different from before? And what do we want it to look like going forward? So we can make this world of work better for everyone, including ourselves, and make it a place where we can be fully human and perform at our best and be at our best.
I love that. Great great closing. And now I want to invite you to let people know how they can follow you, remind them of the name of the book. How can people get more of you if they want to just learn or take the assessment or hire you?
Sure. So people can find me at my website. It's drjennifernash.com. That's drjennifernash.com. There they can also find information about the book. They can purchase the book. It's Be Human, Lead Human, How to Connect People in Performance. They can purchase that at any books retailer. They can order it for you. Amazon has it. I have it on my website. They can also take the complimentary leadership assessment that we were talking about earlier. That's also on the website at drjennifernash.com/HLI. And I have tons of free resources out there for people to look at. They can subscribe to my LinkedIn newsletter. I also have a Substack newsletter. So there are many opportunities to find me and follow me if they are interested in learning more about leadership in general and human leadership in specific.
Awesome. All right. So drjennifernash.com is kind of the one-stop shop for everywhere else. And thank you so much for doing this work, for sharing the message, spreading the light, and for taking the time to talk with me today.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Howie. This is wonderful. I so appreciate you.
Awesome. All right. Well, stay in touch, and I'll let you know when this is up.
All right. That sounds great. Thank you so much.
Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
And that's a wrap. You can find the show notes with links to everything we talked about at plantyourself.com/627. In movement news, I have been doing more heavy weightlifting and not a lot of running and cardio. I found this summer heat is really messing with my ability to stand up straight and not have all the blood drain from my head. So I'm working on that, training for GGMBUCC Great Grandmasters Beach Ultimate Championships, which is going to be in Sardinia at the end of September. Looking forward to that and hoping I can get the cardio up before then. But it does feel good. Jay's got me doing heavier weights these days, not just body weight, but lifting actual iron, kettlebells, dumbbells, and of course the bands. And so I'm hoping that kind of helps stabilize core, doing a lot more core also, flutter kicks and planks. And we'll see if that pays off in the coming weeks as I train for this Old Man Ultimate tournament. That's about it for me for now. As always, be well, my friends.